Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Harkey. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is Technology Planning for the Universal Traveler who is already traveling. So I'd like to introduce to you our speaker, the awareness guru of Indiana, the man with 13 letters after his name, the breaker of tech, enforcer of policy, and the legend of the spreadsheet, Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. By the way, that movie for last month's webinar on contract review, I am scheduled to do my part on that tomorrow. So that should be available by the end of the week, and the URL for that will be the correct URL when it is published. We do have a very interesting agenda today. And the main reason why is because we do this technology planning webinar every year. And so I'm going to leverage what we've done in the past. And I'm really wanting this webinar to kind of focus more in on the tactical analysis part of technology planning. We will go over at a high level the concepts involved in technology planning. Interestingly, Infotex actually started our company in 2000, in the year 2000. Infotex is short for information architects. We were going to be the technology planning gurus. We helped a few businesses in the early aughts write some really interesting technology plans that came true, by the way. And we did a lot in the tactical analysis side of things. But we also never really ended up in that business because another part of our business was installing firewalls, which ended up leading to us becoming cybersecurity people. And by 2001, a year after we started our company, we really weren't writing a lot of technology plans. But I have some really fluffy plans I can show you that did a great job of requirements definition and establishing all kinds of metrics and that sort of thing. But what I've learned over the last 17, 18 years is that smaller businesses, smaller community-based banks and credit unions, companies like Infotex that have a dozen people, don't have the time or the patience or the need to write a big fluffy technology plan. Instead, we really want to get down to the down and dirty and document what our current objectives are, our current strategy, and our current tactical plan. And so I'm going to be talking about that. From a prerequisite perspective, we really are going to leverage what we taught last year. And so I don't want you to leave thinking, oh, this is a drill down on what we taught last year. No, this is an extension. So watching this webinar today will actually just add to what you can learn by going to my.infotex.com/planning 2016. And what I want to do is what I want to do is just kind of walk real quick through what's on that movie. And I think I'm just going to bring the whole slideshow here so that you can see, more on one screen at a time. Michael, tell me, well, that's obviously way too small. We'll bring that up a little bit. But Michael, is it okay to see, a high level what the last, webinar was about? And so, we started out, holy cow, I did a show.
Maybe one more zoom.
Okay, I'll go ahead and zoom in to, right now we're at 100. So let's just go ahead and take it to like 100 and let's see, 125%, maybe 115, 116%. That any better? Looks like we can go a little bit further than that too. So, and really what I'm wanting to just quickly do is show you that, it's interesting. I did a shout out to the IBA last year as well. They probably just got done with their conference again last year. It's usually held in October of every year. And then I talked about, hey, let's look at IT planning through a paradigm shift. I used a book called The Universal Traveler. You don't have to get that book, but what I end up doing is I talked about the goals of IT governance. That the first goal is strategy alignment, and so we want to make sure that our technology planning really addresses how we're going to adopt new technologies to facilitate the business plan of our organization. And then we kind of talked about some of the other fundamental principles of IT governance that really do intersect and connect into technology planning. But ultimately, I established that no matter where you are now, you can see technology planning as a 7-step journey that you go through on an annual basis, where you start where you are, you take a top-down and bottom-up approach. And then actually, this webinar today is going to really focus in on the bottom-up. In other words, we've collected a bunch of tactics we could deploy. Which one should we deploy? And we really kind of do that concurrently with a top-down approach, which is, what is our vision? What is our strategy? How do we execute on that strategy? And so we'll be talking about that some more today. But, we talked about how we need to really kind of figure out where we are in order to figure out where we're going. And I always like, quoting Yogi Berra when it comes to that sort of thing, but I won't waste time with philosophical stuff yet. I will later in this webinar, because you know how it is. I can't get through a webinar without some philosophy. But then I spent some time talking about the difference between strategy and tactics, and how we need to, articulate and make a commitment to our commitment, and get the management team to buy in, because one of the main purposes of a technology plan is it gives us the ability to say no. I'm just going to go ahead and bring that up on the full screen. This is one of the main reasons why you want to put together a technology plan, is because it gives you the ability throughout the course of the plan year to say, well, that's not in the plan. And if we arm our network administrators, if we arm our information security people, if we arm our help desk, if we arm everybody who's on a regular basis having to listen to some really good ideas that management members are coming back from conferences and forums and meetings with their customers and meetings with their competitors, it's the only time they come into the area where the IT people work, is when they have those good ideas. And we have to have a way of tactfully saying no. And so that's one of the things we want to be able to do with the technology plan, is to put ourselves in a position where we might have to we might have to make a change to our plan, and it's a living, breathing document. We talked about that a lot, but ultimately we want to present that plan to the board. It's what gives the authority to the saying no. And then again, we want to see technology planning as a design process, et cetera, et cetera. We gave away a drawing, all that sort of thing. And so that kind of brings us up to where we are, right now. And so what I'd like to do now is kind of, go circle back around to the notion that everybody, I hope, has, that at least as a regular in our webinars and our workshops, realizes that Infotex is going to bring to the table everything we see other banks and credit unions and organizations doing, and what we see at conferences and that sort of thing. And our boilerplates are really meant to be kind of a conglomeration of everything that we're seeing banks and credit unions of all sizes doing. But your job is to kind of bring it back down to earth. And one of the things that we're learning is that if we can take all this, this noise that we have, and then reduce it to some lists, some shorter lists, it helps us keep it simple. And by the way, I like KISS as an acronym, but I changed it from keep it simple, stupid, because people have to say KISS to me a lot. So I don't like the stupid part. And so I changed it to keep it simple so we can succeed. And so we want to take a KISS approach to everything, but definitely we need to take a KISS approach to technology planning. And so I just want to reduce that 2016 movie down to these 3 takeaways, which is technology planning is actually an awareness process. It's what helps everybody become aware of where we are now, where we want to be in the future, and what we're going to do to get there. And it's really should be centered around aligning technology with the business strategy of the organization. The second takeaway is we need a top down to make sure that everything is realistic, that it's manageable, that it's reasonable, that it heads towards the overall strategy of the company. But then also we need bottom up. In other words, there's constant generation of tactical ideas or ideas for new tactics, and we need to whittle out the tactics that don't contribute to the strategy. And then finally, and this, by the way, isn't really what I taught last year, but what I've realized in the interim is that what we're really doing with a simplified approach towards technology planning, with the universal traveler approach to technology planning, is we're creating 3 lists. And what I mean by that is that we are going to create a vision, which really is reducing what could be in our vision down to 2 or 4 statements. The example I'm going to bring to the table for our tactical analysis today has a vision that is a 3-statement vision, and I'll explain more what I mean about that in a few minutes. But also then the second list we want to create is our strategy, and sometimes I see strategies that go on for pages and pages, and I'm thinking this isn't a strategy, this is a tactical plan. But what I would like us to do is I would like us to develop some kind of a process where we're whittling everything that could be our strategy statements down to about 5 to 8 statements that are going to apply for the plan year. And so in 2017, to me, our technology plan is really looking at 2018 and then beyond, okay? And so there's 2 categories of tactics. There's what we're going to do in 2018, and then there's all those other really good ideas that we're not saying we're not going to do them. We're just saying that, hey, in order to make things manageable for our size organization, we're not committing to these other tactics until beyond 2018. And so based on that, I feel like we should try to keep our strategy to a manageable size of between 5 to 8 statements. And then we should try to have a tactical plan that is a manageable plan that, boy, if we can keep it to less than 25 statements, that's great. And just so you know, I rarely see one that's less than 25 statements. That would include Infotex's own tactical plan, which we can't share this year, unfortunately, because it's got a lot of confidential stuff in it. But the rest of the webinar really is going to be spent in the boilerplates. And so just real quick, when you watch that movie, we're going to talk about, what the FFIEC is requiring. And so Michael will be, by the way, providing all these boilerplates to you, with the exception of this one. I'll explain that in a minute. But this is just a list of all the FFIEC statements about technology planning. We kind of pull that together so that you're armed with what the guidance says in case you get any pushback from management team members that don't want to take a multidisciplinary approach to the process, which is also something we encourage in that movie. And then this is just a boilerplate of the actual strategy itself. I'm good. Words coming up here. We need to remember to turn off change tracking on our boilerplates before I grab them for something like this. My bad. But suffice it to say, we'll just kind of go ahead and say no markup on this and just kind of pull out. I'm used to a different version of Office too. I apologize. But all our boilerplates look like this. If you haven't seen one before, they're all color coded, and I really want to stress that, because there's going to be a lot of examples in the sample tactical analysis that we're going to be providing today. And so anything in green is just an example. It's what we've seen before. We're making it up out of, thin air. And so what you need to realize is that, if you have anything green or blue left in the boilerplate when we're done, then boy, your auditor is going to be able to slap you around because it's not your organization's, it's boilerplate, right? So, and so the red is really what you need to look at, customizing. Of course, a boilerplate for a tactical plan is going to be really heavy on examples, and these examples are probably from about 3 years ago or so. So, don't look at them as being what you might want to consider this year. If you're seeing a lot of stuff in here that you're like, well, actually, we're just getting to that now, and but if you're seeing some of this stuff and it's like, well, that's actually what we're thinking about now, and this was written for last year, so it's 2016. We didn't update it, but know that there's nothing wrong with that. It means that you might be a late majority adopter instead of an early majority adopter. I'm thinking probably the examples we're using are for early majority adopters, and that's a strategy decision. Actually, that's more of a vision decision that your board and management team should be weighing in on, and we talk about that in that movie. Back to the boilerplates, then we also have a tactical plan boilerplate, which is the result. It's the deliverable from what we're going to be showing you today. So in other words, this assumes you've already done a tactical analysis and you've already decided what your strategy is going to be. And so the strategies are articulated in the strategy document here, right? So this is the strategy document that I've already kind of gone over. And so we've reduced the strategy, by the way, includes your vision statement. We're actually, each one of these is a vision statement. The vision statement is not this long. Each of these are alternate vision statements. This is a vision statement that I would say kind of covers three or four different statements. This probably covers 5 statements or whatever. And then the strategy statements, if you'll notice here, if we kind of just count them up real quick, we're really looking at about 8 strategy statements. And so what we're saying is for 2016 through 2018, this is what we want our technology strategy to be limited to. There's a lot of other things we could be doing, but we feel like this strategy is going to facilitate the business plan of the bank or the credit union or whatever. Most of our boilerplates, by the way, are written for smaller community-based banks. Back to the tactical plan, then we take each strategy statement and we break that down to what are the tactics that we're going to implement this year in order to assure the board and ensure ourselves that we're actually going to make progress towards the strategy. And so what I want to talk about in more detail today is, well, how do we get to these tactical statements? How do we decide what the tactics are going to be? And I see now my clients are pulling in, by the way, this is fine. Some of this stuff is pretty generic. And so if awareness training is going to be one of your strategy statements, and yes, Dan is almost a cyber poet, right? And so I kind of like fluffy strategy statements, but most of my clients are like, provide training to appropriate levels of the bank is a better way of saying that, probably, because it's more, I feel like this is a better metaphor, but a lot of people want to use down to earth language. They don't want to have to explain what a statement means, and I totally get that. But the point is that you're welcome to customize any of this into your own plan for this year. Now, again, I want to stress also that if you was to talk to a professional planner, they're going to say, well, that's kind of a down and dirty way to do it, and I agree. The seeking of 3 lists, my vision, my strategy, and my tactical plan, is not the way we would preach technology planning in academia. But the seeking of 3 lists is a down and dirty method that seems to work well for smaller community-based organizations, especially if the adventure we take to get those 3 lists is multidisciplinary. In other words, it's not just the Lone Ranger IT guy in the corner of the room. And so how do we decide the tactical plan? Well, we could just write one from scratch just based on what's in our head. And by the way, I do know some people that would be a great way to start it. I'm not knocking that methodology. Some of us are not as they don't have the ability to do that sort of thing. And so maybe throughout the year we keep a list of what people are asking for, or we have a wish list or something that we've been monitoring as we go. There's as many different ways to arrive at the 3 lists as there are people that have decided that they're going to arrive at, use the process of getting those 3 lists as their technology process. But what I'm going to show you here is it looks very confusing here, and it's kind of hard to read. And so what I want you to do is I want you to not worry about what the words say right now and just kind of look at the colors. And so this is a boilerplate that we are making available, and Mike is making this document available to you. It has strategy statements and vision statements that we have tentatively set in a fake organization. These are just fake statements. Not all of them are addressed in a tactical analysis yet, and not all of them are statements that would apply to your organization. But we just kind of came up with these for the sake of an example. And then in the boilerplate, we have all kinds of examples. Now, the first 10 or so lines, we're just trying to set up the categorization. so that it's easier for you as you actually add in new tactics and that sort of thing to already have categories. So this first 10 lines are not even really full examples. We just wanted to, blue is, by the way, instructions, green's examples, red is what you would want to change in your organization. And so, really everything here should be red, because you should probably start from scratch. But you'll see there's a lot of language in here as we get down further in this that you can leverage for your own tactical analysis if you wanted to go this route and take this approach. I have about, of the 25 banks that I'd audit each year, all of them are the smallest clients that we do audit, because that's where our audit risk is. And of those clients, I'd say probably 10 of them are actually using spreadsheets like this at the tactical analysis, and another 10 are, I'm not really sure what they're using. And then 5 are just simply needing help, and they really don't have a good method to their madness yet. So those, by the way, that are using a spreadsheet like this are happier people. They find their job a lot easier. They have a lot more buy-in from their management team, and people know what's expected from them throughout the course of the year. I have seen banks say that, as the information security officer, I'm queuing this up for the whoever the CIO type is in the organization. I've seen the CIO and the information security officer work on something like this together. But ultimately, this is something that's brought up in meetings the last couple months of a year before the plan year, and then we bring it up quarterly throughout the plan year during the steering committee meeting, the check status, and we sort it by what we actually decided we're going to do and that sort of thing. There's a lot of colors in here in terms of color coding, but what I realized is that when we try to present this to you, this actually, I'm suffering from having 2 versions of Office. And so I populated this after the conference I went to last week with all the new ideas I came back with. And so the good news is that if you missed the conference, well, you'll at least be able to get Dan's takeaways. We got some other stuff in here, but once we get to here, you'll see what Dan's takeaways are from the conference. Just so you know, Matrix Integration is a partner of ours, so I pulled their talk out, but all the other stuff I left generically. You're not going to be able to tell, at least from here, what talk it came from. I've also brought in stuff I've seen elsewhere, etc. But you're probably already squinting your eyes wondering, I can't read that green. And so what I want you to know is that right before this webinar, realizing that that's going to be hard to green or to read because of its, the nature of that green, I did try to blacken everything that was green. And so when you get the boilerplate, everything that's black here is going to be green. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of walk you through this at a high level. And so all of our boilerplates start off with this template. If don't worry about forgetting the color coding. It's here, and we also repeat it on the spreadsheet itself. What the sample organization has decided is that their vision statement, and they'll write it fluffily, okay, but the 3 things that they wanted to make sure that they established as far as the vision for their technology use in their organization is that they want technology that is reliable, they want technology that is safe, and they don't have to be the latest and greatest. They don't have to be early adopters. They don't even have to be early majority adopters. They want to be late majority adopters. In other words, after half of the market has adopted a particular new technology, they're going to start considering that technology. Now, having said that, there's always that particular technology that we decide is going to be the exception to that general guideline, but we're aware of that. And so all this you'll be able to get by watching that movie if you didn't make it to last year's webinar. From there, then, I'm just pulling this out of thin air and trying to get ready for a webinar. So don't criticize the veracity of these strategy statements in terms of trying to meet this vision. But what we really usually do is, hey, what do we focus on this next year? And so a lot of this might come from audit findings or the implications, at least, of audit findings. And so, you've gotten your audit report, and actually you didn't just accept the audit report. You were somebody that has a good technology risk management culture, and so you made that auditor go in and present that audit report to your board of directors. And the board of directors asked all kinds of questions that really weren't about the symptoms that we see in the audit. They were more trying to get to the what is the disease that caused those symptoms. And the auditor ended up, after some back and forth, deciding, well, first of all, I feel like the findings would not be there if you had better awareness at all levels of the organization. And the reason why you're not hitting baseline a lot of those CAT statements, those cybersecurity assessment tool statements, is because you need more robust monitoring, and your incident response plan is just a mess or whatever, right? And so it's very normal and natural that part of our strategy is in reaction to recent audits and examinations. The other part of our strategy could be, continuing what we started in previous years. I know that a lot of you would never want a strategy worded this way. It might be better to, help. It might be better to reword this to say, help the board understand cybersecurity, or something more politically correct. I'm using language that my ISOs understand. If you've seen any of my talks, you know that I feel like your job will be a lot easier once your auditor is presenting to your board and your board saying, no, I don't want you to limit to 15 minutes. We want as much time as we need to understand the audit report, etc. So I guess I'm going off into the philosophical realm there, but suffice it to say that if the strategy is going to make it into our tactical plan, then we have to somehow rationalize why that strategy aligns, why that tactic. So let me rephrase that. If a tactic, so each one of these rows here, by the way, are tactics. And so the point I'm trying to make is that if a tactic makes it into the tactical plan, it's because we've rationalized how that strategy, how that tactic, can help us execute one of the 7 strategy statements. So that's a very important connection here. This column here, most relevant strategy objective, is how we make sure that our tactical plan helps us meet our strategy, which is helping us fulfill our vision. So let's go back to the top here. I usually see tactical plan. I'm just going to start at the left and head on to head from there. Okay, and so we have built into this some metrics that are going to try to help us sort at a very high, dumb, non-scientific level which tactics might have more value to us than the tactics that don't. And what I would like to say is that one of the problems with this methodology is that if something's going to cost us money, it automatically gets knocked out of the top of the list. But I have clients that like that notion, that I want to see what's not going to cost us money, and then I want to see what's going to cost us money. Okay, so this is a metric that, you got to be careful with metrics. They work sometimes they don't. We've been using this relative return metric for about the last, 2 or 3 years. Percent completion is just simply how we can demonstrate to our auditors, if we're saving as every time we have a steering committee meeting, that we are actually going in and talking about the tactics that made it into the final plan. Because what should happen is that if we're having monthly steering committees after January, this should say 10%. After February, it might say 30%. Then we kind of lose our way, and here we are in October and it's still 30%, right? And if the auditors see that across the board, now we've got a great paper trail that not only are we developing a tactical plan, but we're actually working that tactical plan. Again, this is a starting point. Make this your own. I'm not saying this is the way you need to do it. I just looked at an IT plan, by the way, the guy sent to me. He told me I could use it as webinar. So way down here at the bottom of this document, you'll see I brought in a bunch of objectives, sanitize them, make sure you can't tell the name of the bank, first. But I brought in this banker's tactical plan, his tactical plan looks not exactly like this spreadsheet, but it's pretty similar. It had, it didn't assign governance categories, which I'll get to in a minute, but it did assign it to people. it didn't assign, the phase that they're in, that sort of thing. So, but anyway, I was able to bring that in so you can see at least what another, and this was a small bank, I don't know, about maybe between 300 and 600 million in assets. But we want to decide who's going to work this particular tactic. Who do we go to? Who's responsible for it? I don't know if we want to go so far as to say who's accountable for it, because we're trying to plan out a whole year in a month here, and so we might change who it's assigned to throughout the year. But I really do find this to be very helpful, is to make sure we know who we're assigning a tactic to. And let's just kind of zoom in on tactics before we go too much further here, just so you can kind of understand what I mean by a tactic. And I'm not saying again that these tactics are really, there is a feature down here I have to start learning how to use. Okay, so that's a little bit much, but so if we look here, here's a tactic. Now this one is, what I also did is I pulled in an audit report, our sanitized audit report. Let me just kind of jump out, show you real quick what I'm talking about there, is that I decided that maybe the example should also show you how we can get findings from our audit reports that haven't been addressed yet, of course, and you already have audit tracking, and so you might want to leave it there. But if it's a finding that's going to take a lot of work to address, and usually our overall recommendations are at about page 25. So yeah, or page 25. So anyway, you'll find, and I didn't bring the technical stuff in, but you'll find that I brought in all of these findings here into the tactical plan. And that way you can see how I've categorized them and that sort of thing. But what I'm saying a tactic is then is an incident response test. This particular organization that this sanitized finding came from wasn't doing incident response testing yet. And so I'm kind of imagining that this might be the way they word it in their tactical plan. And we'll kind of, talk about how it gets prioritized and that sort of thing, and how we're, using the cost estimates and stuff like that. But I just wanted to make sure you kind of had a feel for what I meant by a tactic. Let's just page down to the next one that comes up. The bank needs to invest in bona fide mobile device management solution. This is, this was an exam finding. They were using Exchange Active Sync, but they had quite a few people that were, using BYOD devices. And so I think this was from an OCC exam, not a FDIC exam, but that would be a tactic to implement mobile device management. And, I don't know if this estimate's any good or not, but, what this column does, by the way, if it's a solid quote, we're going to use black. If it's an estimate, we're going to use gray. Just kind of make it easier for us to tell when we actually get the quotes. Again, lays a nice paper trail as to how we're deploying new technologies, that sort of thing. I do have a client that has a column in here, risk assessment completed, because they wanted to demonstrate to their auditor, which was me, that, that they're doing a risk assessment when necessary, that sort of thing. They've had a lot of NAs in there, and we talked about that, but you get the point. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and kind of circle back around to, go back up here to, where we're heading. Governance category, I'll have to admit, this might be more so it's easier for me to keep track of, because I see everything in terms of 8 different governance programs, right? Everything from, access management, asset management, awareness training, business continuity, incident response, risk management, technical security standards, and vendor management. And so I don't know if you keep that in there or not. If you use our boilerplates, keeping this governance category in there helps you when it comes time to update policies and procedures, because policies and procedures are all organized to a particular governance category. And so it can, really help you connect the dots between what our tactical plan is and our policy review. What phase we're in kind of comes from the universal traveler. If we look at everything as a design process, well, design processes actually start with analysis, and then they actually they actually break out analysis into, we're analyzing, we're also ideation, we're generating alternatives as a separate phase, and then we're selecting from those alternatives I kind of reduced that process down to we're analyzing, and now we've decided we've got it down to 3 people. The selection process, in my opinion, is where you should do your vendor due diligence, your risk assessing, that sort of thing. You shouldn't waste time doing that during the analysis process, other than maybe trying to understand what the inherent risk is. But anyway, most of the smaller community organizations I can see maybe are going to eliminate that. Although the client that I was talking about that sent the example, I think they are keeping track of what phase they're in. I don't know if you just noticed, I just moved this column. These are starting points. Sometimes we do a good job now, at least spell checking and stuff like that. But if they're going to end up on a different monitor, the columns might need to be resized, that sort of thing. We're not saying these boilerplates are perfect. We're just saying that they might make a good starting point for you. Give it a name. One of the things I notice a lot in people's technology plans is that their tactics will be a paragraph of information rather than a name. And so it makes it really hard to refer to it. I've seen people refer to tactics by their number because they don't have a name. Let's give it a name. So that way, when we're walking down the hall and we happen to pass somebody, in this case, the network administrator, and we say, hey, how's that, do we want to say, how's tactic number 15 going? Or do we want to say, hey, how's the internal 2FA going? Or, the two-factor authentication on the internal, systems going, or whatever. Okay. By the way, I kind of found this interesting. One of the things that we're suggesting as basic controls right now is to circle back around to your asset criticality analysis, if that's what you use to later paper trail as to what you were not going to apply two-factor authentication on back when we were responding to the original 2007 guidance and then the update in 2011 on multi-factor authentication. The cost of authentication has substantially dropped since then. And so we're suggesting that everybody circle back around and at least consider two-factor authentication on everything remote, including your VPNs. If you're using OWA, let's get two-factor. It's not that expensive. It's not that hard to do. If you've got portals that you're running, you've got SharePoint portal or, that sort of thing. Let's get two-factor authentication on it. And then likewise, we hopefully have inventoried all of our external portals or portals managed by third parties. The board portal, as an example, if you're getting it from CSI or getting it from Passageways or whatever, there's a board portal that you have that probably offers two-factor authentication now, and very often they offer it for free because they're worried that their reputation is going to take a huge hit if some board member uses a weak password or whatever. And so, they're offering tokens and that sort of thing. True two-factor authentication. Let's consider that. And so the reason I'm talking about that now is that we're not saying we're going to do it if we're in the analysis phase. We're saying we're going to look into it. And so that's another reason why you might want to consider keeping this phase here, because if we've already looked into it, now we're actually implementing it, then we're in the implementation phase, not the analysis phase. And I hope that you can see what I'm talking about there. Mike, if it's hard to see it, I'm assuming you're going to interrupt me and we'll go from there. I'm going to find a happy medium. I just know I am, but right now I'm going to go up to 110 and see how that's working.
Yeah, it's hard because the spreadsheet's so long, but
yeah. And maybe that's the reason why I'm also offering up. You can get rid of this column, you can get rid of that column, because we are trying to keep it simple. And I know this is sounding pretty complicated, but how are you deciding which of those tactics end up in your tactical plan? I like tracking where the ideas are coming from, if no other reason, because and by the way, our example doesn't have. But really, what should be happening is that, we should be saying, by the way, all this is seen elsewhere. I just stopped the document once I got to that guy's technology plan. But this right here, but secure instant messaging, maybe that's something that was brought to us by the CFO or something. I don't know. But trying to keep track of which conference we had, we found it at, or that it was part of a audit finding or whatever, I feel it's helpful during not the planning process as much as the status checking process. So when we circle back around and say, hey, a lot of times we'll be like, well, remember that came up in that DFI examination, and we talked to Joe and Julie at the conference, and they said that guy was handing out that same finding to everybody in the state of Ohio, and blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. By the way, I changed the state and all that kind of stuff because I just realized that might embarrass somebody. But the point is that, let's keep track of where the sources are coming from. You might say, nah, that spreadsheet's way too long. I'm whittling that column out. The description and notes, we've got 2 here. And the reason why is because I find it's great to keep track of what we originally said we were going to do. And then over here is where we keep the status information. And yes, this can get kind of deep. We've ourselves taken to having 2 columns, status and then archive status, because sometimes, a project goes on for longer than a year and you're meeting every month, you're going to have at least 12 statements of status throughout the course of a year. But boy, do you now have a really good paper trail that not only does the auditors refer to, but you're referring back to it as you try to hold people accountable to what they've been saying the last 3 months in a row or whatever. We would never do that in our company, right, Mike? So I noticed you've been saying this for the last 3 months in a row, Mike. No, just kidding. And then the most relevant strategy and objective. So what we did is we pulled in the 7 that we had brainstormed, or that we kind of created, that I kind of created as the example strategy statements. So what I'm saying here is that we just kind of brought those in so that they'll easily line up, so that when you're typing something in and you want to, it just brings it right up. That's the only reason why they're up here, right? But I also highlighted this because I wanted to remind myself to bring up that I've seen this and I kind of like it. But I hear all the time the complaints being, well, we don't do any technology plan because as soon as we get the darn thing written, the management team's coming to us with something they want to add to it, and blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. And I feel, okay, that makes sense. It's got to be frustrating for the technology planner, but it makes sense for the management team member, because what's happening is that you're reaching out to them in October saying, we're going to do our technology plan in December. We're presenting it to the board and we're going to do our technology plan in November. We're presenting it to the board in December. And then what happens is in January, your CEO goes to a kickoff forum for the year of 2018, comes back in February and starts thinking about some of the things that were said there, and comes into your office in March and says, hey, we need to do whatever. Okay, and so then, the good news is that we now have the ability to say, well, that's not in the plan. But the bad news is that it's still the CEO, and it's probably a really good idea, and the CEO wouldn't have even thought of it had you not reached out to him or her in October, right? And so we can't punish the person for finally engaging in the technology planning process. If we're lucky, we can say, hey, great, I'm glad, what great timing. I'm going to add that into next year's plan. And I feel like you can get away with that. Probably July, August, and September, you can be saying, oh, great, glad you brought that to our attention. We're going to add that into next year's plan. But in February, March, April, and May, we're going to have to maybe have a placeholder for the midterm edition. And I have seen, one bank, not a lot, but I thought it was a good idea, at least one worth bringing up in our webinar this year. And then I already said that, we're never going to really be able to know truly what something's going to cost until we get down to the nitty gritty of the negotiation. But we should be working in worst case scenario cost information as we start analyzing potential tactics. And so my approach, or what I would recommend, is that we first of all distinguish between, is the cost merely, and I'm putting air quotes around the words merely because we can get into a lot of trouble if we think that time is merely something. But is the cost merely time, or is the cost time and money? If the cost is time and money, have we got at least a worst case scenario quote, or can we at least give ballpark an allowance based on a quick Google search or whatever? Once we get the quote in, and I wouldn't plan, why take quotes during the planning process? We don't even know if we're going to execute the tactic. But we still should try to get a feel for what the tactic's going to cost, or we won't know whether we want to execute the tactic or not. And so That's kind of what that column's for. But I want to look at everything relative to everything else. And so what I'm saying is that based on the cost, it could be merely time, but it could be a whole bunch of time involving everybody in the bank. And so, I'm not going to say that's on a scale of 1 to 5 of 5. I might say that's a 4 or maybe even a 3, even though it's just time. Or, it could only be, $5,000 to $8,000, but it's going to open up a whole bunch of cans of worms. I just know it that, we're going to end up having to do a lot more than just the initial $5,000 to $8,000. So even though it looks like it's maybe a 3 or a 2 on the cost scale, I'm going to knock it down to a 1 because it's a lot more than just the $5,000 to $8,000, right? And so that's what this column's for, is to give the ISO or whoever the technology planning coordinator, the person in charge of the spreadsheet, is the ability to kind of give a relative cost estimate on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is low cost. We want the higher the numbers here, the better. The lower the numbers, not so good. What's the relative benefit to our customers on a scale of 1 to 3? I have been criticized that this is backwards, that the customer should receive more weight than the cost. And hey, what a great culture you've got. And I encourage you to manipulate these numbers to match your culture. Wouldn't it be great if you worked in a company where cost was not an object at all, that the only thing we're worried about is a customer, to where maybe we're putting costs on a scale of 1 to 2. 1 means it's only time, 2 means there's money involved. So there's more time because we got to get approval for the money, but we work for the government or something, and there's this unending stream of money coming to us or whatever. I don't know. But in most of the organizations I work with, cost is kind of a bigger factor. Customers, of course, are important, but does the technology cost really deliver the return, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we've been using these metrics for 2 to 3 years. I can't remember exactly, and they seem to work okay. Risk management is basically, if it reduces risk, we're going to give it a 2. If it increases risk, we're not going to give it any points at all. And then we're going to give it a 1 if it really doesn't impact risk at all. Urgency, I feel like if it's urgent, then we didn't plan for it, right? Some people will say audit findings are either urgent or moderate, all depending on, the criticality of the finding. And then the more notes is really, maybe what you do is you change it, rather than saying more notes, you change it to say status or whatever. And so here's just kind of setting up the stage up here. So starting down here then, and I've kind of color coded what I wanted to talk to you about, but starting down here is where we actually get to our example tactics, and they come from different places. A lot of them came from last week's conference. Starting with this tactic, which I realize is self-serving here, but I'm hoping that everybody would add into their technology plan the extremely difficult task of going out to tour.infotex.com, looking at those movies, and maybe refocusing your awareness training, on, hey, Dan's got movies on incident response planning. Michael has a movie out there on what a scene should deliver. There's a movie on what to expect when we get an incident response test, or blah, blah, blah. So anyway, sorry about that. So we don't usually advertising these webinars, but we've got a wealth of educational information out there. I hope you take advantage of them. But beyond that, then we've also got, Infotex is constantly creating lists. This one isn't done, but we're coming up with our 7 basic controls for 2018. And so I've kind of brought some of those in here, and so that's the only reason why that was highlighted. Just wanted to let you know that these are not from any conference. These are just what we feel like, hey, if you don't have this going yet in your organization, you're now starting to become a laggard adapter of a security control, and banks don't want to be laggard adapters of security controls usually. So hey, might want to get this into your tactical plan. And then these are actually, I think I broke it out to examination. These are actually from that sanitized audit report, but I decided to put DFI examination. Well, I added that DMZ one in because that's regular. And what I want to do is I wanted to show what it looks like when you get an exam finding, and it's like, hey, we're preparing a white paper. And this is what I want people to know, and use this against Infotex. If we ever audit you, and after time you find that our exam finding or our audit finding actually increases risk or causes problems, or just simply not, create a white paper. Establish that, hey, We recognize the risk. Here's the inherent risk, but we looked into it, and here's why we're not going to, um, do what our management response said we were going to do if we wrote the management response in properly and gave ourselves a deadline for mitigating the finding. What we would hope we would have done is said we're going to investigate the finding, and if we agree, mitigate it by such and such a date. But we also, this is another example here of where an audit called out the reference guide, but the bank also learned some other lessons while they were doing their tabletop test. And they basically decided, hey, you know what, we're going to have this tactic include everything, that we've got this list of things we want to improve about our business continuity plan.
Hey, Dan, I have a couple questions. Do you want to wait till
Yes.
the end or go ahead now?
No, let's go ahead and ask them now.
Okay. First one, in future years, say 2020, do we delete the items for 2017, or do we hide filter them so we can always retrieve them, or do we create a new tactical plan spreadsheet?
What a great question. Whoever asked it, kudos to you. So what we do is we have this huge filtered spreadsheet that I'm always wondering, are we ever going to find out where the limit is in Microsoft Excel? I like the history. I like being able to go back and basically saying that. But and by the way, we use a different, we include our technology plan right in our change management spreadsheet is what we call it. And that workshop I have on November 2nd is really going to drill down on how we can use basic spreadsheets to document change management, et cetera. So if you're a bank and you want to come to that workshop, you're going to learn a lot more about that there. But you can do one of the three ideas that you came up with. You can keep the same spreadsheet, know that as time goes on, you're going to modify the spreadsheet, and so earlier years aren't going to have completely full columns because you're going to add stuff to it. That's what we experience on our end, right? And you can use filtering. Now, what you would need to do with this spreadsheet, if you wanted to do that, is that you'd probably want to add a column in here where you're just basically saying, I'm telling you, they got new. Is that how you do it? Oh boy. Well, anyway, I'm not familiar with this version of Office. Don't want to learn how to use Office right in front of a webinar audience, but you can imagine adding a column where it just basically says plan year. And so if this is the first time you're using the spreadsheet, the plan year would be 2018. Well, that way, because there's going to be a lot of tactics, by the way, that span more than 1 year. And so that way, then you maybe just change 2018 to 2019, but everything that's been completed that has 100% over it here, you can filter out because it's from the 2018 plan year, and it's still not, and it's no longer necessary to keep tracking it. So I hope that answered the question. The other way to do it is just to start with a new spreadsheet every year. I believe of those 10 clients that I'm working with, I feel like either all 10 of them are starting with a new spreadsheet every year, or they do like Infotex does, because when our auditors come in, we'll actually only give them the current information. We're not going to give them all the previous information, kind of from a need to know. They didn't ask for everything from, we've been keeping this since 2007. And so anyway, point being that great question. You're going to have to decide on your own how to use a spreadsheet in your own situation. What's the other question, Mike?
This one's more of a verification. I just want to make sure that movies weren't in other places. So the question is, where do I find the movies for the ISOs? And I just want to verify that those are all on tour.infotex.com.
Yeah. Okay. All the movies that we're making publicly available to our clients are on tour.infotex.com. We do have certain movies that we make available, like to audit clients or to SEAM clients and that sort of thing. But if you're a client of ours, we'll bring it up to you during the engagement. So yeah, tour.infotex.com. I mean, I think they link out to YouTube or back to GoToWebinar or something. But
Thank you, Dan.
this is Red. And by the way, I see I'm out of time here, but I'm going to quickly. I feel like I can get the rest of this done in 5 minutes. And so if you have to take off, just watch the last 5 minutes of the movie. But the chief, I'm just putting this in here because I just wanted to. To say that I am seeing, and I'm kind of great, I'm elated to see this, where people are delegating IT tactics outside of the normal steering committee, realm. And so this is how we make sure that when we lose control of something, we're still keeping track of whether it's getting done. Because guess what? When the auditors circle back around to talk to us about the, this isn't from an audit finding, but to talk to us about whatever we committed to doing in the customer awareness training, and we've assigned that to outside of the steering committee to our marketing people, this is how we know that we're going to be ready for that audit. Kind of moving along. One of the things I wanted to also say is that if the color is a darker green, you can't really see it here, but it means that we just kind of punted and put the color in. If the color is the lighter green, then we actually put in what we thought your metrics would be. And when I say we, I was the one that did it on each of these tactics. So I went through on most of the tactics and tried to identify where I thought the metrics should be. The other thing to know is that this particular tactic was just an idea that came up. I'm just wondering. And so if you come across this one, which is basically centered around when are we checking the ATMs when the bad guys are going to take advantage of it? I know we check them when the bank's open and everything, but if we close the bank at noon on a Saturday and we don't open again until 9 o'clock on a Monday, a lot can happen between noon on a Saturday and 9 o'clock on a Monday. And so anyway, know that this might get you in trouble with your, whoever's responsible for ATM security. So if you see that, that's just being written by a consultant that doesn't work in a bank. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. Then meanwhile, we've got down here, I just wanted to point out that there's all kinds of stuff, going on. I liked what my client sent to me. First of all, he sent two things. Number one, follow up on all 2017 e-banking projects. I really feel like you're going to see this and as you start using a tactical plan, that a lot of times your tactic is going to be, let's finish what we started last year. I love that they're monitoring customer satisfaction, that they see that as an IT tactic. It's obviously something they're doing for probably their marketing department, but they're seeing that as an IT tactic. They're tracking it in their monthly meeting. And then the other thing that they did, and I don't see it here, it must have been somebody else that did it, but investigate and deploy new payment methods as they reach their early adoption phase. This one just made me, feel so good about my client when I saw that, because that tells me that they're starting to realize that, hey, we don't need to look at it when it's they want to be early majority adopters of payment methods. They also want to be early adopters of security. I happen to know about this bank. But if we can know where we want to be, it helps us time when we need to look into stuff. Okay. This is something I just wanted to bring. This is kind of self-serving as well. But we are seeing more and more boards do this. We think it's a great idea, and it would make a good tactic towards bringing the board on board. I'm going to go ahead and see elsewhere. Just basically this, we look at IT plans from other customers. We've got their permission to share anything that says seen elsewhere in here, but we still try to keep their names private. So, and then this right here, I feel like this is the placeholder thing, and this is what I'll end on. But we always are going to have that high urgency deployment item come in from the management team. And what we're starting to realize is that pushing back on that kind of lowers their ability to say, yes, I think you're a reliable technology department, right? And so instead of pushing back on it, we need to find ways in our planning methodology to be ready for it. And so that kind of goes back to that whole placeholder concept. Michael, were there any more questions that came in?
No additional questions, Dan.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn control of the webinar over to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. I hope this is going to help.
Again, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time. Again, as always, thank you for the information, Dan. Always useful.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.
When you view an InfoTex webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoTex presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoTex webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoText reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.